Okay, now we followed this almost to the letter, and this is why I was so tired, because it was pretty crazy. So I got here Sunday, May 4th, 12:30 midnight. So first thing we did was we went to Jerusalem to the hotel, and I could still tell you the name of the hotel because I got in a little bit of a scrap with one of the customer service people. Yeah, Israeli customer service. Awesome. So, you know what? At some places, to be fair, some places it was really awesome. Some places, like the bartenders, some of the waitresses, you know, anybody that you actually give money to, they're really, really good. Prima Kings in Jerusalem. Yeah. So I love how they said this. So they basically had the check-in for me at 2:30, which was about the time that I got into the hotel. But then they have this optional, and it was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, the optional thing was a lunch, which was fine. I like, honestly, would have survived. But then the other thing was a tour of Yad Vashem. So, and it was on May 4th. So it was pretty important for me to go there. Then at 6 o'clock that night, I got to meet with an analyst named Caleb. And we did this thing he calls 3,000 years of history in 1 hour. And it actually ended up being about 3, but totally worth it. And then I was supposed to go to a Memorial Day ceremony at the Western Wall and actually stand down at the Western Wall. But instead what ended up happening was Stand With Us had a board member who has an apartment that literally is overlooking the Western Wall. It was the most amazing. I'm sure some of you saw the pictures. Absolutely amazing place. Really good hummus too. So that was the first night. So then the next morning, it says 9 o'clock, but this is the thing. I remember these because I woke up. So you guys all know about the jet lag. Diane especially, she's probably. Yeah. So it's kind of a tough go. But what happened was when I flew, I stopped in Frankfurt for 8 hours. So I was so tired by the time I got here that I actually did sleep. So I wasn't too concerned about it. So I woke up the next morning at about 6. I wrote a quick blog post and just messaged some friends. And then I went to this place called Latrun. Now, so when I was a kid, I was like hardcore history nerd, right? So I knew about Nicanor and all that stuff. But the best part about it was the tour guide kept pissing me off because he kept trying to go slow. And so I also, some of you guys know me and you know that I actually studied modern warfare in university. I wrote a paper on the Merkava tank because it was something I thought was kind of cool. Because at the time it was brand new, right? So he kept trying to pull me aside to explain stuff about the Merkava to me. So I kind of got a little irritated with him, and I quoted him the basics, like the basic stats of the original Merkava tank. And he looked at me, he's like, "How do you know about the Merkava?" And I was like, "I read books." Like, I don't know. Didn't really know what to tell him. But after that, he didn't bother me. He's like, "Okay, you want to go faster? We go faster." That day, I took a picture with this beautiful Ethiopian or Eritrean girl, very, very dark-skinned, and I titled it Israeli Apartheid. And she was really good looking, by the way, but short. And so we took that picture, and it was pretty cool. So then we got to see a Memorial Day ceremony that was really, really intense. They had people laying wreaths at the wall there at Latrun, and it was pretty wild. Like to sit there and actually hear these people, and they were receiving awards. But now the coolest part of the tour wasn't even part of the tour. My tour guide, I got in a few really good arguments with him, but he turned out to be a pretty decent guy. He takes me over to meet this old guy. No idea who he's talking about. He just takes me over, I shake his hand, and the guy shakes my hand, and he goes, "Shalom told me what you do for Israel, and I really appreciate it." He goes, "You know, it's good to know that there's people out there that are doing that." He was a general in the IDF, and I had no idea, because he's an old guy standing there in a t-shirt and shorts, you know, like he wasn't, you know, with 50 people following him. It was just like a normal guy. That's important to remember, because this kind of stuff happened to me throughout my tour. I'll bring up when I met Eli Cohen's brother at the foot of the Golan Heights. I mean, that was intense. So, especially for a history nerd. So then I met with a guy named Ben Moore. Now Ben, he was a former IDF combat soldier, alumni. He was in Cast Lead. He goes on those soldier stories tours. And so I talked to him a little bit. And that was kind of my first glimpse into how these kids are actually demonized. Like, he said even in his own university when he got out of the army, there were people that would, like Israelis, that would say really, really ridiculous shit to him. And I was just kind of thinking to myself, like, that's ridiculous. You're You're the guy wearing the uniform. You're standing on the wall. You're literally between them and bad things. So it was really interesting to see from his perspective how he saw his role. So then I was supposed to go on a tour of Mount Herzl, but for the Mount of Remembrance. It would have been really cool, except I was really, really sick because I found out the hard way that Canada has really good drinking water. You guys do here too, but it's more mineralized. So I had a really difficult time with that for the first 2 days. So I ended up staying in my hotel room. But on my way home, I should say, from Latrun, we did the tour of the city lines. So that was kind of my first inkling about how tiny this place is. Because you got to remember, I got off the plane, drove right to Jerusalem, right to my hotel room. The first thing in the morning, drove to Latrun. Wasn't that far away, but I didn't really notice that it wasn't that far away because it's rush hour morning traffic, so, it feels like normal. And then all of a sudden, we're driving the city lines, and he's showing me where everything is, and I'm realizing how tiny everything is here, how close everything really is. When someone points out and says, till 67, that was Jordan. Till 67, that was Jordan. Till 48, none of this was Israel, It's intense because you're going through and you're seeing the stuff. He told me the story about a nun who coughed her. I'm sure most of you heard the story. She coughed and she lost her false teeth in the road, and it literally turned into this big gong show, an international incident over this nun's teeth, because the guy walked out on the street to pick up the teeth and he broke the armistice line. So there's like this huge story about it, and it's, but I mean, you hear stuff like that and it's just like, wow, like, this pretty tight quarters. So that was May 5th. So then Tuesday, May 6th, I went to Tel Aviv. Now, I didn't really, I probably should admit this because there's people here from Tel Aviv, but didn't really want to go there at the time. I was still really enjoying Jerusalem, all this history stuff, because you got to remember, I'm a big history guy, but then I realized something. So May 6th was Independence Day. And so we went to the Rabin Museum, which is pretty cool. And then we met with Captain Barak Raz. He's the former IDF spokesman for Judea and Samaria. Awesome guy. Yeah. So we talked actually for quite a while. It was really funny because I used to do security stuff. So he was talking to me like, you didn't have to talk to me like a child. So it was really cool to get like a high level overview of what was going on, and mainly how he had to talk about stuff and the policies he implemented to try and make things a little less bad for Israelis, right? So that was really cool. And then we went at noon to visit Independence Hall. So I don't know if all of you guys have me on Facebook, but I put up a picture, and that's probably my favorite picture. It's the actual day, and then I'm standing behind the girl, and it was funny. So yeah, but it's a picture of Independence Hall, and I'm standing right where the picture was taken, taking a picture of the picture of Independence Hall in Independence Hall. The best part about that was that when I posted that, a bunch of native people from Canada were like, dude, that's badass. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty awesome. Like, not only do these people create their own state, but now I'm standing here where the state was created, where the guy said the words, But my favorite part about that, and it still resonates with me and with a lot of native people, because we tend to be very, other than me, I guess, tend to be very short-spoken. When Ben-Gurion ended the speech, that's epic. How else do you end a meeting? State of Israel is declared, meeting's adjourned. I'm sorry, but that's badass. That's, and then they just get up and walk out. It's like, there's no cake. So that was pretty cool. And then we went on a tour of the first neighborhoods of Tel Aviv, and we got to see, how everything started, which was really interesting for me too, because you have to remember where I'm from, 100-year-old city is an old city, So when I was in Jerusalem, I kind of had a little case of I feel really small right now, because, so my city's 112 years old and Jerusalem's thousands of years old. So seeing Tel Aviv was a little more, okay, this is a modern place, until we went to Jaffa, and then I realized, no, this is not a modern place. Okay, so then we went on to a barbecue. Now, we went to 2 barbecues that day. So I'll get to that in a second. First barbecue we went to was for this, the International Salon. So it's a group that is trying to draw more younger, affluent, Jamie. So they're trying to draw more young Jewish people together and introduce them. It's kind of like a matchmaking thing. I was teasing them about it, because there are a lot of good-looking chicks there, by the way. But I'm not Jewish, so considered it. Yeah, I did for a while, yeah. Yeah, she was good looking. Okay, so, what's that? She lives in France, but I'll hook you up after. Okay, so the barbecue was fun, and I got to meet somebody that was pretty interesting there. I got to meet Michael Orn. And yeah, it was pretty cool, because, and the weirdest part was the girl that I was with from Stand With Us, she walked over, and, okay, so this is what I learned about Israelis. They're not shy. Like, it's really humorous to me, because, like, native person, I probably would have walked over there and stood there for 2 hours until he finally said, okay, you've been standing there long enough, I should talk to you. My friend Chevy goes right over to him and, like, literally pushes 3 people out of the way and says, this is my friend Ryan, you really need to talk to him. And then I'm standing there all awkward because these other people are giving me the fisheye, and I'm like, yeah, Ryan. You know? Like, yeah, it was awkward. But it was really cool, because then we talked a little bit. I got his card. I gave him my card, and he said he wants to help with what I'm going to be talking to you about after this. So then it was funny, because the food, there was so much wind and dirt and stuff that I went to get a hot dog and it was like eating sandpaper. But so I was kind of like, you know, and then I was laughing. I was like, I don't know if this is kosher. Is Tel Aviv dirt kosher, you know? So I had actually gotten an invite earlier from a friend of mine that I write stuff with, and he asked if I wanted to come for a barbecue, but originally I was like, you know, there's so much stuff going on, and I didn't think I was going to be able to. But then Chevy's like, maybe I'll call Brian and see what's going on at his house. And I was like, I don't know, we'll probably get there and everyone will be gone. Sure enough. So we get there, and it's this beautiful apartment, and we go up to see him, and I finally meet Brian. He's from Israellycool, by the way, and they are actually really cool. So I get to meet him, and I was like, this is awesome, because, you know, you meet people from the internet, and I'm sure we're all doing that right now, you know, like we meet people that we've talked to, and it's just kind of cool because you feel like you already know them, right? So, you know, we sat down and we ate, and it was funny because my friend keeps really strict kosher, and so she couldn't eat the meat. But it was so funny because she was just happy that we were there, and then we were visiting, and it was such a great meeting. And then, of course, I saw his safety room, which was the first time I'd seen one, so I was like, wow, that's heavy. But then I saw his little boys, and I showed his one little boy a game that I'm sure you hate me for now. I grabbed him by the feet, and I was bouncing him on his head. And but the funny part is, you're laughing, but the funny part is, he's like, do it again. And then he started bugging Brian to do it, and Brian's like looking at him, he's like, you can tell he's like, yeah, Ryan, thanks, buddy. So, I mean, that was kind of the first night. So then I went back to the hotel. Now, the one thing I haven't brought up yet is how ridiculously hot it is here. So it was really, really hot to me. Everybody kept telling me how it was cold.
Especially when you're from where you are.
Yeah, but everybody kept lying to me. They're like, no, it's going to be nice out today. And I'm like, ugh, yeah, Israeli nice, maybe, you know? So literally the first night, I went and sat in the pool for like an hour. It was funny too, because the lifeguard felt sorry for me. He was supposed to close the pool at 6, and he didn't. He's like, no, you go ahead. He's like, you look like you need it. Because I was, you know, beat red and sweaty. So I sat in the pool. It was brutal, but it was nice of him. And it was cool. So the next morning, I was supposed to be up at 9, but I was actually up at 6. You're going to start noticing that was a theme, because I would be excited to get stuff done, and I didn't want to sit around. I knew the tour guide was sitting there, so I figured, what the hell, I'm not going to sit here. So we did a tour of the White City, which I thought was kind of neat. It was funny because the architecture is not really my thing. I'm not that kind of guy. I'm sorry, I'm straight. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I was rude. But so what we did instead, after we did, it's those Bauhaus buildings, yeah, in Tel Aviv. Yeah. Yeah.
When the Nazism started and all the great Jews that were studying in the Bauhaus,
Yeah.
they had to escape, and they came to Israel. They had no work, and they started to plan all the
Yeah.
work in Tel Aviv
Yeah.
with the method of the Bauhaus.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's pretty and stuff, but I mean, to me, it's buildings, right?
You have to connect it to the history.
Yeah. No, if you look at it from the history thing, then it's kind of...
An architect, so they
See, exactly. Now she's just like, I don't like that guy anymore. He made fun of architecture. Yeah, hey, if it was tanks, I'd have been all over it. So, yeah, we did that. But then one of the things that we did that day that I thought was really cool, we went to the Lange Museum. And some people got really upset at me actually at home because they were like, they think I'm a bit of an extremist because of some of the stuff that I say, which is kind of funny because I think I'm kind of in the middle. But one thing that resonated with me is the 18 principles. I don't know how many of you are aware of them, but Abraham Stern wrote 18 principles. And those 18 principles, when you look at them, if you substitute Jews for Indians and you substitute Israel for our native lands, for us, it's a pretty big deal because it's literally like he wrote our Constitution, right? So I showed a few friends of mine that, and some of them are the people that I'm trying to get to come with me next year. And just from reading that, there were two people that were really on the fence. They read that, and they were like, now we want to come, right? So that was really important. I was supposed to meet with a guy named Khalid Abu Tuame. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I can't read it. Yeah, so I got there, and apparently he was there, and then he had to leave. So, like, I got to see him for, like, a handshake. But it was still pretty cool. Yeah. And then we went to this place called Rehovot. Yeah. Okay. I know. You know what? You guys are going to laugh at me, but, like, my friend Sarah got me a book called Hebrew for Dummies.
That's right. Half my relatives in the U.S. couldn't pronounce it either.
Yeah. Well, that makes me as dumb as them. Awesome. Thanks, man. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just teasing. It was, yeah. My friends tease me a lot because the funniest part is that a lot of Hebrew sounds a lot like Cree, which is part of the language that makes up what we speak, which is Meshif. But it also sounds a little bit like French to me because, like, the way you roll the R's. So when an Israeli says my name, they're like, Reuven Bellerose. I'm just like, yeah. So, yeah. Sometimes I wish I would have just stayed with Ryan Mervin. But that's my dad's name, by the way. So, okay, so then we visited the bullet factory. That was another cool thing. Like, to me, that resonated. And the reason I'm going to take my friends to that bullet factory at the Institute was because when you see it's basically they smuggled an entire bullet factory and put it under a kibbutz. And meanwhile, the British are telling them, you can't defend yourselves. You're not allowed to buy guns. You're not allowed to buy bullets. Like, you guys are screwed, basically, is what they're telling them. And the Israelis knew that the Arabs were planning on attacking them as soon as they declared independence. So what they did was they actually snuck an entire factory, and they built it under a hill. The coolest part about it was they invited the British in and said, hey, we're going to store oranges here. There weren't any oranges on the kibbutz, right? But the British guys walked away saying, okay, well, they got a big hole in the ground. They're going to store shit in there, and they never looked again. So I showed that again, something I showed my native friends, and I said, look, like, you guys have this idea that the creation of Israel is this colonial thing, and it was a sure thing, and the British made it happen, when in reality, that's not even remotely what happened. And so they started to identify with it a little bit because they were like, these people had to fight the same fights that we're fighting, and still are, So it was really cool. And again, that's something where it's starting to draw the commonalities for a lot of these people, and that's one of the things I'm working towards. So then we returned to Tel Aviv, and they have Tel Aviv in free time, but we didn't get back to Tel Aviv until 10 o'clock at night. So that wasn't really that much free time. Yeah, and it was noisy, by the way. I think that's actually the night that there was the big rainstorm. So, yeah. So the funny part about this is, it wasn't 10 o'clock, it was 8:30 we got back because I got home late because I sent a Facebook message saying, hey, I'm in Tel Aviv and I want to go get something to eat, so who wants to do something? So this girl messages me that I talk to quite often on Facebook and says, hey, yeah, come meet me. I work at this bar right close there. And afterwards I find out it's like 2 blocks away, so we should have just went to the bar she works at. But instead, we went back to Jerusalem, to the Shuk. And I ended up staying up till like 1 o'clock in the morning because we went, but it was really cool. I got to really eat Israeli food. So I made it back alive, which was cool. Not, those service cabs, that's not always a foregone conclusion. Then we have the departure to Haifa. So that's the next day. Thursday in the morning, I went to Haifa. I got to see the Baha'i Gardens. Absolutely beautiful. But the biggest thing about that, and one of the more important things, more important aspect for me, was the fact that it shows the plurality of religion and religious freedom here in Israel. Because the fact that you have one of the most sacred places in the world for another religion, and not only do you not, claim it for yourselves, but you don't, I mean, you just let them do their thing, right? That's amazing, because I'm going to get to that later with some of the places I went, some of your holy places that I couldn't even go in. Like, to me, that was pretty ridiculous. So we went after that, and this is one of the coolest things I did. You're going to hear me say that a lot. We went to Daliat El Carmel. Yeah. Yeah. So I got to meet some Druze people. And we had lunch at this place called Noura's Kitchen. Amazing food. Yeah. Wow. Like, wow. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Just ridiculous. And the best part was the lady, like, as soon as they told her that I was native, I don't know why they did that, but it was kind of embarrassing, because then she pulled out all the stops. It was crazy. And then, yeah, to talk to them, they actually, my guide left the room, because apparently they don't like to talk about themselves, like their religion and stuff. And so my guide left the room for a little bit, and she started explaining to me some of the stuff about Druze and who they are. And it was really, really cool to talk to her. And so that was something else that I added to the itinerary for the people that I'm going to bring. Then we went to, you guys call it Caesarea, we call it Caesarea in Canada. I'll go with your pronunciation because I'm here and you might beat me up. So we went to Caesarea, and it was beautiful there. It was stunning. Like, I've been to some, I think at last count, I had some crazy number of countries. I can't even remember what it is now, but it's like 30 or 40. I've been all over the place. That might have been one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to in the world. Like, and the best part was my tour guy got mad at me because I started putting on my sandals. He goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going in the water." And he's like, "You can't go in the water here." And because they were fishing, and you're not allowed to go in the water where they fish. And I was like, "Oh, that's bullshit." But anyways, I got to wander around. I got to see stuff ancient stuff, like just ancient history stuff, which for me was really moving, and it was cool. Yeah, so that was one of the better days, I thought. It was really beautiful there. And then we went back to Tel Aviv, had dinner, and then Friday, May 9th, this is the first day that I got to go, I'm just breaking things here. This was the first day that we got to go to Samaria. Now, I know some of you guys know that I talk about indigenous stuff a lot, but that's because it's important to me. So one of the things that I try to bring up with people when I talk to them about Israel and why it gets on my nerves when you guys are always being attacked is because Samaria, to me, is the promised land, right? Like, when you read the history books, you know where the Jewish people came from. They came from Judea and Samaria. So to me, it's always really important, especially for my people, to understand that when we're talking about indigenous rights and we're talking about just in that focus, we have to understand that this is where the Jewish people came from, period. It's not even a discussion. Thank you. Yeah. So, exactly. So, we did the tour. I got to meet Mark Proesser. He was in charge of security for the region. They took me to the Sagot winery. One of the coolest things was at the winery, he actually stores the wine in some of the Maccabees caves. And he doesn't let everybody in. I didn't know that. I thought, hey, I'm like, he probably does this for tourists. And he's like, he took me in the back, and actually we walked for like half an hour, and we got to these caves, and that was awesome. They have like old wine presses still in the cave. Like, you can feel the history. Like, it was just intense. He also said something while I was there that I took away. He said, okay, so when you're talking about grapes, when you're making wine, if you have grapes on one side of the valley, you can be 1 kilometer to the east, wine won't be any good. 1 kilometer to the west, wine won't be any good. But you get the wine right in the middle, and that's the best. That's what it needs to be. So it's the same thing with people. If we're over here or we're over here, it's not the same as if we're where we're supposed to be. Now, after that, we went back to Jerusalem, and I had my first experience with the Machne Yehuda market during the day. Which was, yeah. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but Israelis have no concept of personal space. Yeah. And Canadians have a very, very well-developed concept of personal space. So my tour guide kept walking beside me, and I don't mean walking beside me, but beside me. And I would take a step to the right, and then he would take a step to the right. And the other thing I'm sure you've recognized now about Canadians is we have this ridiculous politeness thing where we sometimes won't tell you that you're irritating us. So I kept doing it until I was against the wall. I had nowhere to go. And then he was still right here. So finally I'm like, okay, Shalom, seriously. Like, now it's not even funny because I kind of thought he was messing with me. And he's like, what? And I'm like, dude, you're way too close to me. And he's like, huh? And he literally looked at me like I was an alien. And I'm like, dude. And then he finally got it. He's like, oh, sorry. It lasted about 15 minutes and he did it again. But I mean, at least for a minute, he kind of understood what I was talking about. And then the other thing was the people. I'm walking along, I'm looking at stuff, and that's how I am. You guys are going to laugh, but pretty much the whole time, I walked around like a tourist. I'm not going to lie. I was gawking at everything. And I literally do this everywhere I go. And then people just bump into me. And I'm not used to that, because in Canada, people will literally, it's like, my friends all laugh. They're like, it's like the Red Sea. They'll literally just part. And they don't ever bump into me. But no, in Jerusalem with the Jewish people, not so much Red Sea. So we finished that day, and then we went to the old city. That was, parts for you guys, apparently not for anybody else.
I wanted to know where you get the idea for breaking the wall. That's where it's happening.
Okay. It was, I'm not even kidding. Even now I get awkward when people walk too close to me. All right, so then we checked into Jerusalem Hotel, but then we walked down to the old city. The cool part was we walked down to the old city. And just going in there, and then the funny part was, first they took me to a shopping mall. And, okay, so pardon the language. Yeah. Pardon the language, but I literally turned to the tour guide and I was like, what the fuck, dude? Like, I didn't come to Jerusalem to go to the mall. Like, are you kidding me? I've been to malls all over the world. Reasonably sure this is a mall. And he's like, no. He's like, trust me. We get to the middle of the mall, and that's where he shows me the stones with the numbers. And he explains they literally took everything and moved it over one street. At that point, I was like, okay, fine. Sorry about the swearing, Because I was really kind of like, what the hell am I doing here? So we get into the old city, and that was really intense for me, because at this point now, I'm walking the same streets that I've read about in the Bible, that I've read about in stories, especially for a kid that grew up reading. It's intense, and to see everything. And then, thank God I didn't have a dickhead for a tour guide, because he kind of understood that I was just wanted to look at things. I didn't need to have somebody jibber-jabbering at me. So he only, when it was something really significant, he would say, okay, you might want to look at this, or you might want to look at that. And it was pretty intense. Some of the stuff that I saw, too, it was really, at that point, you really start to understand, you guys have been here a long time. So then the next day, I got up at 10 o'clock in the morning. We went to the Israel Museum. So that was pretty cool. We went and saw the Shrine of the Book, which, again, maybe is contributing a little bit to the fact that I'm having, I wouldn't say so much a crisis of faith, but more of a dislike of stupidity. Because when I was a kid, what's that? Yeah. Well, the thing is, when I was a kid, I was really religious. I was an altar boy. My mom was used to make me go to Sunday school and everything. And, I always wanted, you guys are going to laugh, but I wanted to be a priest so that I could go to Rome and work in the Vatican archive, because I'm nosy. I want to know everything, right? And then I found out, thank God I found out, that not every priest gets to work in the Vatican archive. So I was like, nope, done with that. So, yeah, to see stuff like the Qumran scrolls was intense. That's, again, that's stuff that I looked at that and I thought to myself, that's somebody that was around back then, and they wrote that stuff, and it was super intense. So some of this stuff, just so you're aware, I'm not taking my friends to see some of this stuff, because it's, the religious stuff, they can do their own religious tour. I want them to start identifying with Israel more. So then, anyways, we went to the Mount Olives. Okay, now, I'm not going to lie. This is the one place where I'll admit, I kind of felt a little bit like, wow, this is pretty deep. The Mount Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, because that's actual place, right? It's not some idiot had a dream and said, oh, yeah, it happened right here. So, some of the stuff I identified with a little bit more, some of it, not at all. Then we did this light show thing that I thought was going to be really, really lame, because I'm not 12, right? So I went and did this light show, and it was actually pretty cool. They had very artistic stuff at the Tower of David. So there's music and stuff. So that was on May 10th. So now we're about halfway through. I'll go a little faster. So May 11th, I had a stand with this office staff meeting. Cried like a little girl. I'm not gonna lie. I started crying and couldn't stop crying. It was heavy. At the stand with this office, they asked me about my trip and the stuff that I was thinking about, because basically all the stuff that I've seen here is stuff that I really would like to see my people start emulating and venerating. We have sacred sites that we don't protect. You know, we have issues with whether or not we even want to be sovereign. There's some of us that, you know, they actually make the argument that we're better off just being Canadians and getting rid of everything that makes us who we are. I mean, I'm sure you guys can identify. I mean, I was shocked to see Jewish people advocating the same kind of stuff when it's important to understand what's really important is who we are, right? So, yeah, like talking to those kids and seeing these young people that are basically fighting to keep everything that makes you Jewish alive, right? Like it was pretty intense. And I learned a lot of stuff from them insofar as stuff that I'm going to take home and talk to my people about, because there's a lot of things here where I don't think you guys even really understand how, well, I know you do on a certain level, but sometimes maybe just being here, it's because it's always in your face. Maybe you don't see it as often, and somebody coming from the outside and seeing it, you know, they cry like a little baby. Okay, so then we did the geostrategic tour. So I drove around with this girl, Michelle, and she showed me all these different places that are of geopolitical significance in Jerusalem. They showed me the bullshit house, you know, the one where everybody said this is symbolic of the Jews stealing Israel. And it's this house where a family didn't pay rent and they got evicted. Well, when they got evicted, they went and they built a shack in the backyard, and then they squatted because nobody had rented the house because it's in the middle of an Arab neighborhood and nobody wanted to live there. But then some students from yeshiva moved in, and all of a sudden international journalists everywhere, this is Jews stealing land, look what they're doing. And I remember that story because I was in Canada, and that's when all this was happening, was when I was starting to get more involved with this stuff. So I actually saw this house, and I'm like, wait a minute, I've seen that on TV. And sure enough, she explained, she showed me, this is what happened. Now, I come from a res. If you don't pay your rent on the res, you get the boot. It doesn't matter if you're an Indian, it doesn't matter if you're white. If you don't pay your rent, you get the boot. And that's just the way it goes. So just the idea that these people had literally, and they were given multiple opportunities. Like, she showed me the paperwork. Like, she wanted me to really take away from that this wasn't an arbitrary thing. It wasn't like somebody just said, you're an Arab, we don't want you here, beat it. The whole neighborhood's still Arab. Just that one house, they didn't pay their rent. But what happened was everyone else in the neighborhood saw that, whoa, shit, these guys are serious. And they started paying their rent. You know, but the whole world sees it, and what are we told? Oh, the Jews are stealing houses, right? So that's something I'm going to take home with me, and I'm going to make sure that my people understand that this isn't always about necessarily Arabs and Jews or anything like that. Sometimes this is about the law. You know, you pay your rent, you don't get evicted. So, and that brings me to my next piece, which was I went to Gush Etzion. And I got to tour with this guy named Yitzhak Sekulow, and he's a pretty cool guy. Basically, we went on the Patriarch's Path. We went to Kfar Etzion. We got to see the lone oak tree, which was actually really cool. We went to the Efrat Lookout. We did a tour of all the towns. He wanted to drive out to the desert, but we didn't have time. It was getting to be pretty late. The thing I took away from that was that, it's funny, I actually made this comment to somebody today. If you kill somebody and take their stuff, you don't get to keep it. It's not the way the world works anymore. In ancient times, that's how the world worked. If I was bigger and stronger than you, I'd walk over and say, I want that. And if you weren't big and strong enough to keep it, I took it. And if you fought me, I killed you. And then I took it. And nobody would stand up for that person and say, you know, that wasn't right. But what we have now is we have this whole thing called human rights, right? So in the 1920s, you know, Jewish people lived there. Like, Jewish people lived all over this place. And there might have only been a few of them, but they still lived there, right? So what I learned about the Gush Etzion thing was that when Jordan came in, they killed everybody. And they killed wounded people. There were people hanging out in a little bunker, and they threw grenades in the bunker where the wounded were. Like, there was no mercy. And these kids that grew up there, they had been evacuated to Jerusalem. And so these kids, every day, they'd go out to the hill, and they'd look. You know, that's their home. They see a tree. That's all that was left, right? And then, so that was that day. Then May 12th, where do we go? Oh yeah. So May 12th we went to Capernaum. It's one of the holiest sites in Christianity. That was an interesting, for me it's very, very pretty. Like it's very physically nice to look at. I didn't really feel anything really special there. But then we did what I thought was probably the coolest part of my tour, like for me being a war nerd. We went to the tour of the northern borders. So, yeah. So we got to see like the Valley of Tears, the Quneitra Lookout, the Lebanese border, all that stuff. But the coolest part about this whole part was that while we're at the Golan, I look over and I see this puff, and then we hear a boom. And so I elbow this guy. His name's Elliot Chodoff, I believe. He was touring with me, and I said, dude, I think they're shelling that village. And he's like, yeah. He's like, they do this quite often. I look over, and then literally right after, it's like boom, boom, boom. And it was crazy for like about an hour and a half, just steady. And then Elliot's like, why don't we go down the hill? I know this sounds funny because, of course, me being me, I'm like, okay. So we jump in the car, and we drive around the hill. We get to it's a Russian-built building that was the Syrian headquarters in the Golan, but it's less than a kilometer away from Quneitra. So we climb up on top of the building, and we're watching. What's that?
Sound of spring.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say Arab Spring. Yeah. It's it is sad though, because we joke, but at the end of the day, there are innocent people that are dying there, and it's hard to. Yeah, exactly. And nobody. The thing is, this is what I've noticed in Canada. Nobody says anything because it doesn't matter. Yeah, nobody cares because it's not Jews. You guys aren't doing it, so who cares? So we're watching, and I'm literally standing on top of this building, and it's like a front row seat watching this, and it's like watching stuff hit. And I said to the guide, I'm like, we're pretty close, dude. Like maybe we should, back away. And he's like, no. He goes, take a look at the direction they're shooting from. And then that's when it hit me, because I've done security, and one thing they teach you is that in artillery from side to side, there's not a very large margin for error. If they bugger up, it's going to be too long or too short. So what had happened was, I guess when all this stuff first kicked off, they were shooting, and a couple of those shots went a little too far, and they landed on the farms in Israel. Israel said, we don't like that very much. They expressed their displeasure in a very obvious way. Boom. And then they stopped doing it. So what they've done now is instead of shooting this way, they move over here and they shoot this way. So we weren't really in any major danger. Like some of my friends were like, dude, that's crazy. And I'm like, it's not crazy at all. So it wasn't nearly as scary as it sounds. But now here's the coolest part of the day. We're walking down, because the building's all smashed up, but on one corner the stairs still work. We're walking down the stairs, and this tour guide comes up, and he starts talking to my tour guide. And I'd seen this other tour guide, and he knew that I loved history stuff, right? And so he says to me, he's like, Eli Cohen's brother is in this tour group. And I'm sure you guys know who that is, right? Yeah, exactly. It was ridiculous. So I start walking down the stairs to see, and then my friend says, do you want to meet his brother? And I was like, do you really got to ask? So I walked over, and I just said to him, I was like, thank you. Your family's done an amazing amount, and your brother is a hero. But to meet somebody like that, that night I wrote, in this land, history walks. So it was pretty intense. And then we got back in the car, and we drove up to the Lebanese border. And then I got to see. It's funny because my best friend in the whole world is Lebanese. When my mom passed away, his mom kind of adopted me, right? So the funny thing is they're Christians, they're Maronites. So he's in the Canadian Army. He's not, I wouldn't say he's super pro-Israel, but he's definitely not anti-Israel. But his mom, since I started doing this, his mom's actually started becoming more pro-Israel. And it's really funny to watch because the dynamics at family barbecues get really awkward. And it's actually really funny because she'll say, I saw something Ryan posted on Facebook. And then his dad's like, I don't want to hear about it. So that's pretty funny stuff. So then we drove that night, we drove back to Jerusalem that night. Then the next day, we drove out to Sderot, and that was Sderot. Yeah, that was one of the heavier parts of my tour, I think, because I think the worst part for me is seeing stuff with little kids. Right? It's really tough. So we saw rockets. I mean, everybody probably goes to the police station and looks at the rockets. When you see them, I took a lot of pictures because some of my friends at home are real lefties, and they sorry, Carol, I know. You gave me a lecture. You gave me a lecture once about saying lefties a long time ago, and yes, I remember it. But some of my friends in Canada are really seriously lefty, and they say stuff like, well, it's okay for Israel to blockade them, but they should let through the concrete. Or it's okay for Israel to block them, but why are they blocking nails, So they showed me a rocket that hadn't exploded. What was it filled with? Nails. They showed me 6 rockets that used concrete for ballast, right? So when I see this stuff, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, well, that's why they don't let them have concrete and nails. And yet somehow they're still managing to build these massive palaces, because I looked at Gaza. I went to the border, that's the next part, with Elliot Chodoff again, and we looked across and we could see these massive houses. They drove us right up to the checkpoint, and he had a map that I'm probably not supposed to talk about because it was an army map that's not given to everybody. He showed me everything in the map, and he showed me the warrens. Like, they look like a maze. There's no way that the IDF, how do you fight in something like that, right? It's impossible. Like, it was an impossible task. So I went from being somebody that really opposed the whole pullout to maybe somebody that understands it a little bit better. Still don't like it, but, at the end of the day, it is what it is. And then we got to visit an IDF base. So there's this lady in Canada, a very good friend of mine. Her name's Lori Hartwick, and she's done amazing work with Calgary United with Israel. One of the things I don't talk about much because it sounds like I'm patting myself on the back is we had a big flood, and we organized this group to do stuff. Haul food and water to the reserves, right? Now, here's the cool part of the story. I posted on my Facebook the night of the flood, and I said, look, I'm going to load up a truck with food and water tomorrow. I'm going to take it to the reserves. They got nothing. Anyways, like 50 people show up the next day. No joke. Like 50 people. And trucks and vans filled with food and water. Already bought. So all people from Calgary United with Israel. Jews, right? About 6 other people that weren't from Calgary United with Israel showed up. Friends of mine from my friends list. So we hauled all this food and water out there, and there were kids, women and children that didn't have anything. Everything had washed away. Literally what happened was the flood broke, and they were told, you have 15 minutes, get everything you can, get out of the house. So these people had nothing. So the reserves themselves didn't do anything because the chief and the council were sitting in the bar. I have documented proof of that. They decided, well, we can't do anything about it anyway. Let's go to the bar and get drunk. Meanwhile, there's people with no food and water living in an arena, a community arena. But it was funny because there were people from Calgary United with Israel. Lori made lunches for 75 people, like sandwiches, kosher, by the way, which I laughed about because I'm like, cheese sandwich, really? But yeah, just it was awesome, and it was really good to see. And that was kind of one of the things that helped start breaking down the barriers, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but to Indians, you guys are white people, right? I know it sounds really weird, but to a lot of Native Canadians, you guys are white. And so we just kind of always lump you in with white people. And like, I don't. I'm lucky enough that I figured that shit out a while back. But a lot of Native people think of you as white. And because there's this huge, I don't want to say dislike, so I'll say distrust of white people, mostly because they lie to us a lot and try to kill us all the time. So I'm sure you understand about that. So we have this inherent distrust, right? But it was so funny to see that, when we drove out there, because I get it a lot, because I'm pale. Like, for a Métis person, I'm actually quite pale. We drive out to the res, and this Native guy walks out, and he steps in front of the car, and he goes like this. So I get out of the car, and he's like, hey, we don't want no white people coming in here. You guys are pissing us off, eh? That's how they talk, by the way. And I was like, dude. So I looked at him. Okay, I shouldn't say this in polite company, but you guys don't speak Cree. So I said, Mama na puskechima. He looks at me, and he kind of goes like this, right? And then he goes, are you an Indian? And I was like, well, kind of. So he starts laughing, and he goes, oh, okay. And he's like, who are these people? And I was like, oh, they're kind of like Indians too. So he looks at them, and it was funny, because who does he see first is Lori, a little short, very pale-skinned lady. So he looks at me, and I can tell he's probably thinking, like, man, those are the whitest Indians ever. But he's like, okay. And then he goes, what do you got? And I said, well, I brought food and water for these people, so we're going to take it to them. And right away, you could just see the relief. Like, the guy was like, thank you, because they didn't have anything. And so just as an aside, for 6 days, They didn't get anything from the government, and they didn't get anything from the reserves. For 6 days, it was me, about 25 or 30 other Native people, and about 50 people from Calgary United with Israel that hauled food and water there every day. We did this after our regular work. So we would go to work during the day, and at nighttime, there was a couple nights I didn't sleep. And there were a lot of nights where other people that I know for a fact didn't sleep. So, but I don't usually talk about that because it sounds like I'm like, oh, look what I did. But there were a lot of people that were involved. A lot of people. So that was that. So anyways, her son, that's where I was going. Hartwick. Yeah. So anyways, when I met Lori, she kind of became my Jewish mom. Well, there's a few here actually. But they tend to baby me and mother me a lot, and it's kind of cool because when you lose your mom when you're young, you don't really have that. But then sometimes it gets to be a little bit much when there's so many of them. But it's still really nice, right? So, anyways, she's a great lady, and so her son, I talk to him on Facebook sometimes. Now he's a lone soldier; he's here by himself, and Adam, Daniel Birnbaum's the other one, yeah. So. Adam and I, we talk all the time. I tease him because he plays soccer, which is not football. It's soccer. And so I tease him about that a lot, right? And he's a good kid, so he bugs me back. And I took him, so you guys are going to laugh. So I brought him a care package, which was 3 big bags of beef jerky and some maple cookies. Because he told me before that he loves maple cookies, never gets to eat them. So got to meet him, got to hang out with him for a couple of minutes. It was really cool. Then we went to the Dead Sea. And I learned that I float really, really good. Yeah. And I learned that the Dead Sea is not actually water, and that it burns a lot. Yeah. And that's something that nobody shared with me before we went, and I shaved that morning. So, yeah. Yeah. And then it was funny, I hated it. No offense. I went there with this little girl named Charlotte. She's Israeli, so she's about this tall. And she's awesome, but she's really, really small. And she's trying to put the mud on me, and she can't reach. And this lady was taking pictures. And I, talk about feeling like a freak show, right? I'm like... So, we finally got the mud on, and then we realized something really funny. Both of us put the mud on. I put mud on her, and she put mud on me. So our hands were full of mud. How are you going to get the camera? So then the best part was how long it took us to figure it out. Because I was like, oh. So I look at her, and she looks at me, and I'm like, ah. And then we look at each other again. Literally, it's like 2 dummies. And then I was like, okay, fine, I'll go wash my hands off. So I go down to the water, start to wash my hands off. And then I realize this stuff doesn't come off very quickly, and the water is very oily. And then, so then I come back and I dry my hands off, which comes in the story later. Not a good idea to use your towel. So I dry my hands off and I get the camera out and I take a picture of her and then I hand it to her and she uses 2 fingers and gets a picture of me. And then we go in the water, which is the funniest part because I just walk in and I get to the water's about here and I'm just whoa. And all of a sudden my feet go like this. Yeah. So I come up out of the water. My eyes are on fire. Yeah. I was just like, oh, this is not cool. And then it goes in my mouth. Because I go, ah! And I'm just like, and then I realize how really, really stupid it is to say, ah. So then I'm trying to see where the shore is, because I'm tall, so I was quite a ways out now. And I'm walking back to get to the water, and I finally get to the thing, and I'm washing off. And I'm just like, thank God, water. And then I go back and I grab my towel that I had earlier wiped my hands on, and I go like this. So literally for the rest of the day, my eyes were beet red because I rubbed it in. And then I'm like, why is this still burning? And then I look at it and I see the mud and I'm like, oh, idiot. But so that was the Dead Sea. And then the coolest part about the Dead Sea is the restaurant we went to. So we went to this place called the Casbah. Or what is that? No, Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal. And we literally sit in tents like little sheiks. And we smoked hookah and we ate Israeli food. It was really good. It was really cool. But that was my trip. My organized trip. And then, so that's thanks to Stan with us. And then I had to do a few more things. So there were two things on my bucket list that they couldn't get me. One of them was to spend Shabbat in Hebron. And the reason that was important to me was because all the stuff that I've read about Jewish people say one thing that's very, very clear, and that was that Hebron was the first capital city. Like that was King David, right? Now, I told you earlier I was kind of a runt when I was little, right? So as big as I am now, and as many Goliath jokes as I hear, when I was a little kid, I grew up identifying with David. He was little, he had to be smart. He couldn't just run up and punch somebody, he'd get beat up. So that was kind of me for a large part of my life. So to read about his city and Hebron, and then to read about, all the history that was there, I already knew a lot of this stuff. So I knew that the cave of the patriarchs is there. And so I wanted to see this stuff. So a friend of mine, sitting over here, Sarah, she organized a trip for me. And I'm going to be honest. In Canada, when we hear about these people, we hear about the jihadi beards and, the machine guns and everybody's angry and screaming. And, we hear all the bad stuff. Like they're all extremists and they're all living there and they're all causing problems and they all go in the market and smash things. And so I had to see this. I had to see it for myself, right? So the first thing we did is we get to this house. And it was a long trip, by the way, just so everybody knows, taking the bus to Hebron is a pain in the ass when somebody expects you to hitchhike. So we get there, and the first thing we do is we meet this family, and Israel and Zippy. Is that how you say it? Zippy? Zippy? Yeah, Zippy. So, and we meet them, and we meet two of their kids. And it turns out they have this massive family, and her grandfather is Rabbi Cook. So I guess that means something. I don't know. Yeah, to you guys. Yeah. So, I'm meeting these people, and I'm kind of meeting them just more on a personal level. I didn't understand their history at first, right? But we're talking, and they seem like really, really nice people. Like right off the bat, they're very welcoming, and I noticed something. The guy I'm talking to isn't walking around packing a gun, He's just a dude. When we were walking up, Sarah can attest to this, the first thing I see is this playground, and it's surrounded by buildings. And I was kind of like, what the hell? But I didn't say anything at the time, but I'm looking at it, and it's kind of odd. And then we keep walking, and we see these little kids playing. And then all of a sudden, we hear these loud booms, and I can hear automatic gunfire in the background. And these kids just keep playing. Didn't twitch, nothing. So I'm looking at that, and I'm just like, how the hell are these little kids, like this is a normal part of their experience, right? So we get to the house anyway, and I'm talking to the mom and dad, and I bring that up to them. I said, I hear these concussions. I'm pretty sure they're concussion grenades or something. And so the mom says, well, that's kind of how life is here. So these kids, that's how they grow up. But she said if you watch them, they don't stop playing. They keep playing, right? And that was important for me for later on. A lot of that I keep saying. But so they're cooking dinner, and everything's, it's like a normal family. I've been to a few Shabbat dinners now, like 5 or 6, and it's the same as everywhere. The ladies are making food, and the guys are talking about bullshit, and it's just one of those kinds of things. It was really cool to see, like, these people are all just like everyone else. But then we start talking about, their lives there. And Israel starts explaining to me, that their beliefs about how their ties to the land and that this land is very important to them. They showed me, the stairwell that's like 4,000 years old. These walls that are like 3,000 years old. Now, you got to remember, I come from Canada where something that's 200 years old is old. You go to Montreal and everybody's like, this is the old part of the city. It's been here for 350 years, Like, we're a relatively young country that way. So I got to see all these things, and I'm looking. And then the best part was the tour guide, David, he's like, just kick the ground. You remember that? He tells me to kick the ground. So I kick the ground, and I look down, and there's this, it looks like rocks, but then there's some long, straight, thin rocks. And I was like, what the hell? I pick it up. It's a piece of pottery. He told me I could, so there. Yeah. Yeah. So and then he later on, David took us to his house, and he showed us, first off, the thing that really impressed me is they all have lots of books, because I love books, right? But he showed me bullet holes in his wall where they'd been shot at. He showed me a bullet hole in a room that was a kid's room. It was obviously a kid's room, I see this stuff, and all I can think to myself is like, these people have a pretty heavy existence. I'm not going to say, I'm not here to talk about what's right and wrong, but to me, you should never be threatened on your ancestral land. You should always have that ability to be where, like, you should be able to go where you're from. Now, there's a lot of politics involved in that kind of stuff, so I try to stay away from it, but from an indigenous standpoint, your land is your land, right? Nobody can take that from you. They can't take who you are away from you. It's just impossible. So, yeah, that was, then we went to the Lac Beaumer, and I'm sure some of you are going to read about that on the newspapers in the next couple days, because I was there with Sarah, and I'll just give you a quick rundown what happened. So we went down the hill, and they've got free sandwiches, which I thought was pretty cool, pastries, pop, you name it. And they've got all these little kids, and they're all running around playing, like everybody's just having a good time. They had a band playing music, absolutely joyous. Like everybody's there, obviously having a good time. We were standing up on the hill, and I see these Arabs, and there's a couple white guys, and they got their cameras out. And I said to Sarah, because when we started lighting the fire, they kept trying to light the fire at the top, which I thought was kind of funny, because as a Native person, you know that you light a fire from the bottom. Because if you don't light the fire and you run out of stuff to make the fire with, then you get cold and you get hungry because you can't cook your food. Clearly, I don't miss many meals, so I know how to make a fire. So I walked over and I told the one kid, I'm like, dude, make the fire at the bottom, get some small sticks, make the small sticks burn, the big sticks will burn, fire will be good. So the other guy kept arguing with me, and they kept trying to light the top of it. And so finally, I went and got a bunch of small sticks, and I put them near the bottom with this kid. And then he caught on, and he went and grabbed a bunch of, I don't know what those big fronds or whatever they are, and he puts those in. Now, it's really important. I want to say one thing about this, because the story got this completely wrong. This was in a park, right? It's in a park, and I have the entire area in my head because we went through that park twice. And there's an old car, a whole bunch of, sorry, I'll try and wrap it up. But anyways, in the newspaper, they started talking about how Jews burned down an olive grove. Yeah. So the whole story is how they made this huge fire, burned up an olive grove, and the Jews did all this. Like, it's just horrible. I'm reading this story today, and I just about lost my mind. I was like, are you kidding? I was standing there. So I wrote them a quick little letter saying, hey, you guys maybe should do some fact checking. And I got no reply. And so I started sending it out to some other people. But my point is that, these are the things that we see in Canada. So I already got messages from my friends saying, hey, dude, I read your blog. That's not what happened in your blog. And I'm like, no, that's not even remotely what happened in my blog. Yeah. Ari messaged me and asked me if he could use it. And tomorrow I'm talking to the Jerusalem Post about it. So the thing is, here's the thing. We talk all the time about politics, and I know that everybody in this room, you're here because you're like me, you're pro-Israel. So it doesn't matter if you come from the left side of things. It doesn't matter if you come from the right side of things. I like the right side of things. But it just matters that you support Israel, right? And the thing is, with all these things, the people that are doing this are counting on the fact that there will be some people on the left end of the spectrum. They're going to say, oh, if it just wasn't for the settlers, there'd be no problems. But this stuff didn't start after the occupation. I mean, this stuff started years and years and years ago, long before there was any kind of occupation. And one of the things that I try to do where I go is I explain to people that, indigenous rights, colonizers, all that kind of language that the lefties really love to hear and use. I mean, the problem is that they don't use it correctly, and they're not coming from a place of historical accuracy. And so one story I always tell is how we deal with bears. So where I'm from, we have bears. It's a fact of life. Like, ever since I was a little kid, I would get told, Ryan, don't go outside without your gun. And it's like, when you're a little kid, you don't think about it. You're a little kid. So ever since the age of 6.5, I carried a rifle. Why? Because if you go outside and you don't have a rifle and there's a bear, he'll probably eat you. Or at the very least, he'll mess you up a little bit. So, ever since I was a kid, that's just a reality of our existence, right? Which is funny because, you guys are looking at me and you're like, bears? Really? But see, yeah, the thing is, you guys have something very similar. But people don't seem to realize how similar the situation is. Because the thing about a bear is if the bear realizes that if he comes after you, you're going to let the air out of him, he'll bugger off because it's not really worth it. A bear likes to get an easy meal. Trust me, they're lazy. All they do is eat their whole life. So he'll see and he'll be like, whoa, that guy's got a gun. And they're actually pretty smart. People don't realize that. They're pretty smart. Once you slap them on the nose, they bugger off. So the bear sees you got a gun, he walks away. But here's the thing about bears. We put our garbage outside. Now, sometimes it might be 2 or 3 days before we get enough garbage to burn. The bear will come and he'll get an easy meal. So then the bear thinks to himself, there's an easy meal. And he comes back the next day. Well, after 3 or 4 times of getting an easy meal, he starts looking around to see what else is nearby that he can get an easy meal. And sometimes it'll be your pigs, sometimes it's your horses, your cows, whatever it is. But once the bear starts getting to that point, there is no option. There's no more chase him away because now he's not scared anymore. Now it doesn't matter if you have a rifle, he'll try and get you or he'll wait for you. And people don't realize this. They will literally sit and hunt you. So what I've realized, like from looking at this, is how akin that is to your situation. And people don't like when I say this because it sounds a little bit almost like warlike, but at the point you're at now, the bear's already been in your garbage dump.